How to Become a Virgin by Quentin Crisp, Chapter 6. The Television. Rights in The Naked Civil Servant were sold for £350. When audiences appear to imagine that my financial status has recently been altered out of all recognition, I mention this sum. I like to hear them gasp. All the same, this is not a hard luck story. During my entire working life, never, over a long period, did I earn more than £12 a week. That 350 meant a great deal to me, and I am grateful for a deal which was so conscientiously, so scrupulously transacted, although it took over 4 years to complete. I do not remember exactly how I received the news that Thames Television had bought Mr. Mackey's script, but I do recall that, when it was arranged that I should meet the director of the play, I was taken all the way to Teddington by taxi. At that time I had had so little experience of television that I was amazed by the extravagance of this method of transport. At Teddington Studios, besides Mr. Gold, the director, I was introduced to Mr. Hurt, who was soon to become my representative on earth. He said, "I have no intention of merely giving a vaudeville imitation of Mr. Crisp." I was somewhat relieved by this remark. This occasion, social, pleasant, informal, was in fact the turning point of the tide against which I had been swimming for more than 60 years. I was on my way back to becoming a virgin. More than that, after a lifetime of condemnation for my sexual deviation, that very fact was to be used to present me to the world as being of interest for human reasons that transcended my sin. Very kindly, so that I might earn money under the heading of technical advice, I was allowed on 4 of the locations where the film was being photographed. First I saw the scene where the child dances in front of the mirror. This seemed difficult to get just right, because, to my surprise, the boy looked not at his reflection, but at the director. Later in this day I was taken to Richmond, where John Hurt's club membership card was torn up. On other occasions I also witnessed the meeting in the cafe and the art class. Only in this last place did I offer advice. I feared that Mr. Hurt might not know what an operatic business posing can become if you fling yourself into it. I needn't have bothered. He himself was an art student in a time gone by. I could not get used to the intensity with which the entire team cared whether the production was like my life or not. I had supposed that all that was needed was for some such person as I once was to be seen surviving some such events as I once experienced. I should have known that, if you show the members of an art department a real person, they go mad. They have spent so many long hours peering at faded group photographs in which the third schoolboy from the left is rumored to be some famous politician. Now, at last, their subject was appallingly distinct. They could work at something that would yield demonstrable proof of their skills. They took pictures of me from above, from below, from the left and from the right. They even took me to a shop in Burlington Street, so that the wig-maker there would be able to reconstruct the architecture of my hair. At one time or another during this performance, Mr. Hurt wore 5 wigs in order to pass from innocence, a rich mouse color, through depravity, scarlet, to senility, discreet mauve. People often ask me if I worked with Mr. Hurt before he began to play the part of me. It is difficult to imagine what any such sessions would have been like, but we do not have to try. I met him only twice before he began to make the teleplay, once as described at Teddington, and a second time when he and his true love invited me to dinner at their home in Flask Walk. I mentioned the difficulty an actor might have in playing a victim of fate, because, in an extremely competitive profession, he must, in real life, cultivate every ounce of aggression of which his nature is capable in order to stay in work. He disagreed, and he should know. In 10 Rillington Place, he portrayed Christopher Evans, the all-time victim. Never during the evening did I say, nor would I have dared to say, that my host might try doing this or that while acting the naked civil servant. Yet when I finally saw the teleplay, I noticed that he had included in his characterization all sorts of tiny details. He had mastered the Red Indian's walk, and as he drifted along the streets of London, he held his fingers straight rather than slightly curved as ordinary mortals do. When Mr. Mackey told me that he had found someone to play the part of me, he added, "I've never seen anyone so willing to play a part." I suggested that if you were to show anyone in the entertainment business a book in which almost every paragraph begins with the word I, he will be anxious to play the lead in it. But I now think that in Mr. Mackey's portrait of me, John Hurt saw some special opportunity. If he was led to do this by instincts, they did not betray him. He won an award. When you meet him in real life, Mr. Hurt seems shorter than I, and he is actually much slighter. He looks pale, frail, and very tired. The naturally drooping eyelids, together with having his eyebrows plucked from underneath by the makeup department, gave him, on the screen, the scornful look that in earlier life I was so often accused of wearing. John Osborne, whom I once met at a party, suddenly turned on me with the words, "You've made sure that young man never gets another good part." In fact, the reverse was true. Since making the naked civil servant, Hurt has hardly ever been out of work. For this reason, and because my own life has recently become more occupied than I ever thought it would be, it is unlikely that I shall ever know him well, but I shall always be grateful to him for the immense tact with which he presented me to the world. It is easy to imitate other people, and especially easy to imitate me. The whole production might at any moment have become a scream, but because of him this was avoided. In any situation, however bizarre, he never saw himself as the camp scarecrow that I seemed to other people to be. Instead, he worked from within to reveal me as the helpless victim of a misguided dream. I saw The Naked Civil Servant when it was shown to the press before it was televised. At least I saw almost all of it. The car sent to take me to the Thames Studios in Euston Road was late. I could easily have travelled by bus and been punctual, but already I was becoming accustomed to the crazy luxury of the media. I was very worried upon that occasion, because I knew that, immediately the film was over, I would be questioned by the critics. And journalists don't want answers, they want jokes. The best that I could manage was to say that the television presentation of my life was better than the real thing because it was so much shorter. When the play was flashed before the unsuspecting eyes of the public, I saw it with some friends. In a calmer mood by then, I tried to judge it purely as entertainment. This was not easy because it was the kind of program that, had I been in no way personally involved, I would never have watched in a million years. I have long since ceased to be interested in homosexuality as a subject. There just doesn't seem anything left to say about it. In spite of this, I was well aware of what an excellent play had been produced. The unresolved quality that I thought I had perceived in Mr. Mackey's script had completely evaporated. The narrative moved slowly but relentlessly forward. Even the captions, which when they were first proposed I could not take seriously, seemed wholly integrated into the mode of telling the story. I have been asked if there was any detail in which the play differed from my actual past. The question has recurred so often that, after a while, because my whole nature revolts against saying nothing, I searched for some point of deviation, however trivial. At length I dredged up the fact at one moment in the play Mr. Hurt tells one of his persecutors to sod off. Not only would I never have used such a word, which would have sounded far more unladylike then than now, but no one as habitually acquiescent as I would have risked this gesture of defiance in a situation so obviously dangerous. I made this observation in Mr. Hurt's presence. He delighted me by protesting that he had said the words very nicely. The day after The Naked Civil Servant was shown to the public, I was interviewed by Mavis Nicholson, the darling of afternoon television. I had been looked over beforehand, so the event did not come as a great surprise, nor did Mrs. Nicholson. I had often watched her questioning minor celebrities, and thought her just like home but prettier. The interview that I remembered best was the one during which she sat between two very discreet homosexual men, and asked them if it was true that men find it difficult to form lasting emotional relationships. They gave the conventional reply that in society there are so many bonds that keep heterosexual couples together, and so many forces that drive gay men apart. I regretted that neither interviewee had said that he was glad that, owing to his temperament and his position in society, he was free forever from the damp, dark prison of eternal love. I must have written these words somewhere, because when we met, Mrs. Nicholson quoted them. I regarded my meeting with Mrs. Nicholson before the public interview as an opportunity to set her mind at rest. It is always the interviewer who has more to lose than the interviewee. The latter can say what he likes, so long as he does not expect ever to appear on television again. The interrogator, however, is the employee of a vast corporation with a carefully guarded public image, and if by some awful chance something treasonable or blasphemous is said, he may be held responsible. Mrs. Nicholson said that she did not know what questions to ask me. I assured her that I would not be shocked or embarrassed by anything that she might say, and that in my replies I would never use the shortest words for the longest things. Our interview turned out to be one of the best I have ever had, and the highest point of it came when by mistake I allowed the word camp to fall from my lips. "Oh, do you think your little friends will understand the word?" I asked, nodding towards the world beyond the camera. Mrs. Nicholson leaned forward to give the lens a searching look. "I should think so," she said, in a slightly cynical voice. In my first interview on Late Night Lineup, I had only wanted my replies to be heard, understood, and by a miracle believed. By the time this second program was promised, I wanted more than that. I wished to add what I am to what I said. To some extent, I desired to have the situation on my own terms. Mrs. Nicholson never tried to prevent this from happening. Indeed, she aided and abetted me. I had taken to watching other people being interviewed, not in order to hear what they had to say, but in the hope of discovering techniques for dealing with the special hazards of this highly artificial form of self-presentation. What is needed is some way of talking intimately with the interviewer while acknowledging that we are both on display. If, for instance, I am asked whether or not I like writing books, I cannot pass my hand across my brow and say that my genius is a great burden to me. I am in the presence of millions of people, some of whom may get up at 4 every morning to milk cows, while I rise at 10 and sit by the fire making a few unusable notes. Although I never questioned him about it, I imagine that when, worn out with trudging the unrelenting pavements of Wardour Street, Mr. Mackey at length accepted Thames Television's offer, he may have felt that he was settling for less than his original dream of seeing his scenario made into a real film. Certainly I, though glad of any outcome to his heroic persistence, was slightly deflated because I am so mad about the movies. Since then I have changed my mind. Financially, there can be no comparison. If The Naked Civil Servant had become a picture, I need never have stepped out of bed again. But in other respects, television has advantages that movies lack. If a film has a homosexual theme, it is heavily advertised as such. In consequence, it is seen only by gay people and liberals wishing to be observed going into and coming out of the cinema where it is being shown. On television, I reached a more mixed audience. Books and plays are diversions about which most of us exercise some decision, even if our selection is based on totally misleading publicity. The movies are in a twilight zone. A woman may save up time and money to spend on a film of which she has very definite expectations, or she may flop into the nearest cinema to fill in time between the end of a shopping orgy and the beginning of a train journey back to Chorley Wood. Television is even lower down the scale of human choice. We nearly always see it by default. In my mind's ear, I hear a housewife calling from the kitchen to her husband in the living room. "What's on now, love?" "The Queers." "What's on the other side?" "The news." "Oh, God, as you were." In some such circumstances as these, my life story was unfurled before the eyes of people who until that moment had never given a serious thought to the subject of homosexuality. I have pondered deeply the difference between the public reaction to Granada's documentary and to the play shown by Thames Television. The telephone calls provoked by the former were contemptuous or hostile, by the latter, mixed. The letters that I received after the first were negligible. Those that followed the second were kind, sometimes laudatory. The manner of strangers encountered in the street subsequent to the first program was uneasy. After the second, it was a subtle blend of curiosity and forgiveness. Some people have attributed these differences to the passage of time between 1969 and 1975, but there has been very little profound change in morals since the war. While my book was in the process of being published, amendments were being made to the law concerning homosexuality, and someone said to me, "They'll make a lot of difference to you." This remark was kindly intended, but absurd. No one has ever pointed the finger of scorn at me and cried, "Look at him, he's illegal." If anything, the piratical element in my predicament was an advantage. It appealed to all outsiders, who, for quite different reasons, despised the conventions. The English hated me for being effeminate, and in a country where women are still to some extent despised, this attitude has not altered. The gradual and very slight change that we have witnessed during the past 30 years has occurred because more and more power has passed into the hands of the young, or to be more accurate, a louder and louder voice has begun to issue from their lips. Teenagers have always been interested in gaining more sexual freedom than their parents wished them to have, and have never been keen on acquiring the social leverage that their elders constantly recommend. Now they can say so. In other words, we have not moved into a permissive society. The young are just as stuffy, in their own way, as adults. We are merely stuck with an outspoken society. Since neither I, in the documentary, nor Mr. Hurt, in the teleplay, flashed you-know-what before the cameras, and since neither of us uttered obscenities, we might both, by modern standards, be considered old-fashioned, even pre-war. In this respect, the two programs were therefore equal, and since in the first my sins were only discussed, and in the second they were acted out, the latter, at least in the eyes of older viewers, must have seemed the more immoral of the two, yet the reaction to it was more benign. I think the answer lies largely with the press. Critics will, I am sure, agree that they have no power to change minds that are already made up, but they can reorientate the ditherers. When one journalist went so far as to say that the Thames program justified the existence of television, she made it legitimate for even the most refined taste to have enjoyed itself. And when Clive James, of all people, said that the protagonist in The Naked Civil Servant appeared to be some kind of a hero, amusement was nudged in the direction of condemnation. I cannot deny that I was surprised at the unqualified praise lavished upon the teleplay. I had feared that one or two critics at least would point out the degree of depravity in my life story. In fact, no mention was made of this. I was pleased that no opprobrium had fallen on the makers of the program, and my pleasure turned to delight when I found that some of the glory properly meant for the play itself was descending like golden rain upon me. The redemptive element in television was beginning to work in my favor. It is also true that the sheer bulk of critical opinion, and therefore of general discussion, caused my existence to impinge upon even the most sluggish consciousness. As my agent said, "You must accept the fact that you will become part of the fantasies of total strangers." The teleplay in which I had appeared for about a minute and a half came to be called My Program. This was not because my presence was in any way dramatically effective, but because, from being constantly photographed, my image became recognizable, as unchanging as a stuffed bird, though not as silent. An object of ridicule to schoolboys, and of curiosity to taxi drivers. At first this latter reaction was a source of wonderment to me, but after a little reflection I saw that it was natural, even inevitable. If you have driving skills and you don't like people, you find a job as a long-distance lorry driver. On those seemingly interminable nocturnal hauls, you need speak to no one and meet no one, except hitchhikers, whom you ravish and whose used bodies you fling like empty Yorkie wrappers into the hedges. If, however, you do like people, you acquire a taxi. Whom will you meet? The rich, the famous, and the desperate. What a wonderful diet. Bit by bit, a taxi at a time, I was becoming the almost acceptable face of homosexuality. When the laws of England were being changed, market research into homosexuality was carried out. Nothing significant emerged from these inquiries, but this. When asked what they would expect a gay man to look like, housewives replied, "Oh, you know, actorish, effeminate, inclined to wear bright colors." Now they would merely say someone like Quentin. If, on the other hand, they had already admitted to knowing a homosexual man, and were asked what he was like, they usually answered, "Just like everyone else." Superficially, the present fashion among gay men for normalizing their clothes and their mannerisms is a relief to the rest of the world. Socially, it makes dealing with them less embarrassing, but deep down, this subdued public image makes heterosexuals uneasy. If gay men look like everyone else, then they may be anywhere, everywhere. How much safer to be able to see one coming from a mile away. It gives you time to make up your mind what to do, call the police, lock up the kids, scream with laughter, or duck. This, of course, is what I told the whole world as far back as 1931, but then it paid no heed, because at that time it did not realize that there were any queers other than the ones that could be spotted. Now that intimations of a large hidden minority have come to light, meeting an obvious pansy is almost a relief. I do not merely infer that public attitudes towards me have softened, I have proof. Recently, I was standing at a bus stop in Shepherd's Bush when a lorry drew up on the opposite side of the street. The driver climbed slowly down from his cabin onto the ground, crossed the road, and said, "You're Quentin Crisp." When I falteringly admitted that I was, he added, "I get the hang of it now." He meant that he had come to see homosexuality on my terms, as a desire to live as though one were a member of the opposite sex. It is, of course, precisely this easily digested image, camp, ineffectual, slightly silly, and, worst of all, almost indifferent to sex, that the gay community finds so distasteful. Aversion to it is so strong that Gay News expressed the opinion that it would have been better for the cause if The Naked Civil Servant had been published posthumously. A literary way of saying drop dead. It was not, however, the book that caused the rift between me and the great body of homosexuality. While my identity remained in the form of written words, the gay movement, as distinct from gay people, accepted, and to some extent welcomed it. The fact that a book in part about my sex life had been published at all was considered to be a tiny triumph for the cause, even if my image did lack the aggression requisite for an era when protest was developing into a fad and the voice of minorities was becoming everywhere so shrill. As very slowly I moved from the written to the spoken word, as I ceased to be an idea and became an icon, certain attributes of my nature, which before could only have been inferred, became obvious. My struggle to ingratiate myself with the majorities grew to be horribly apparent. I once went to address all the homosexuals in Westminster, not in the Houses of Parliament, but in a public house called the Westminster Arms. During the meeting, someone said to me, "You used to be the Martin Luther King of the movement. What are these Uncle Tom sentiments you now express?" Never, even with a jolly laugh, would I have dared to compare myself with Mr. King. Any endeavor to do so would not merely be presumptuous, it would be pointless. I was never militant. As I explained to the gentleman who asked me the question, if in that far-off time I sat on a bus next to a stranger and he ostentatiously moved away from me, I said, "If you like, I will get out at the next stop, but even people like me cannot walk everywhere." Public interest was beginning to be focused on me just when the new image of gayness, by no means the same thing as gaiety, was being advertised. Homosexuals had not only modified their appearance, they were forever popping up on television to explain that they were really quite ordinary. In my opinion, this ploy will never work. Except in the state of Illinois, ordinary people do not go about claiming, nay boasting, that they are humdrum. This declaration is chiefly interesting because it is the reverse of a previous posture. In a time gone by, homosexuals, when challenged, used to rattle off a list of names of writers whom history claimed were gay. They seemed to derive self-assurance from a supposed kinship, even though they themselves never wrote a word, not even home. When I was young, most men who indulged in any sort of sexual deviation went about their business, especially their monkey business, discreetly. The people who proclaimed their difference from the rest of the world did so, like me, because they had no real choice. Any other course of action would have demanded a lifetime of perpetual self-watchfulness, as opposed to self-regard. Our brazenness was the solution to a personality problem rather than an explicitly sexual one. This is difficult for young people nowadays to understand because sexual freedom has become more important than identity. Indeed, it has superseded it. The modern philosophy states, "I ejaculate, therefore I am." Those who now protest and demonstrate and march most persistently are often those with the least clearly marked personalities. Like cells in an organism, I finally got the right word, it takes thousands of teenagers to make up a single identity. They feel that it will be through numbers rather than willpower that they will at last become a force of which society must take some notice. The trouble with this method of trying to gain more liberty is that those who adopt it, instead of bowing to the laws of the community in general, must conform to the narrower and even less rewarding constraints of their chosen regiment. There is a restaurant in New York in which there is not a woman to be seen. At any one time, the place contains about 40 men, all of whom are between the ages of 18 and 28, or wish they were. All are wearing tractor boots, pre-ruined jeans, kitchen tablecloth shirts, and little scrubby mustaches. The only way in which an intruder can tell that he has not accidentally stumbled into the canteen of a building site is because everybody looks so clean. These young men look marvelous, but if we are speaking of personal liberty, they have taken a step forward only in that they have entered a more fashionable ghetto. In England, the craze for uniformity has passed into the realm of parody. Manliness has given place to cruelty. They were never so very far apart. In Earl's Court, there is an establishment where the entire clientele is dressed like the Wild One, in black leather decorated with chains. Almost everyone present has remembered to carry a crash helmet, but no one mentions that he has arrived at his destination by bus. Even as a sexual visiting card, this gear is totally misleading. In an encounter of the fourth kind, half these boys would turn out to be in search of nothing more bizarre than a little friendly sensuality. I do not think that any of these antics is sinful. I complain only that they all confuse an issue that is already surrounded by misconceptions. I have never expressed the opinion that what modern homosexuals want, they do not deserve. Whatever tricks they get up to, I wish them well. I am also aware that what they demand for others as well as for themselves. Thus an element of altruism is added to the call for justice. I have only tried to make 2 points. One is that, if anyone submerges his individuality in a group for the sake of gaining political acknowledgement of his mere sexual needs, he may find that he has thrown away the larger part of his personal freedom. I also fear that the ultimate outcome of too much militancy shown by any minority may not be what is hoped. This stridency creates panic in the majority and brings about a fierce confrontation between the gay people and the sad people. This can only reopen that hideous chasm between them that time and boredom were just beginning so conveniently to fill in. When I was working in New Haven, a psychiatrist invited me to spend a day at his home. I had a wonderful time, but at the outset was worried by the fact that, as he drove through the town, all his spare attention was given to pointing out which bars were gay or had been gay, which restaurants were straight, though run by homosexuals, and so on. I know that psychiatrists must deal in what is not in what might be, but I was disturbed by the kind of glee with which he surveyed the ugly rift between two warring factions. I longed to ask my host if he was not yearning for the day when he would be able to frequent a bar simply because it was near or warm or quiet. It seems to me that the Kinsey report counts for nothing if we have not learned that the answer to the question, "Are you queer?" is no longer the desperate cry, I am," but merely a polite, "Not today, thank you." My host's imagination seemed to dwell with alarming intensity upon the rituals of that sex-sodden monastery, which, even when I was young, I hated. I would not then, and I will not now, accept the notion that, if someone has not been propositioned by 11 o'clock on a Friday night, his week has been wasted. I urgently feel that, if gay people want to be happy, they must vacate their secret world. They must stop frightening not only the horses, but also their riders. They must recognize that it is in the very nature of integration that you cannot fight for it. You can only wait. Mr. Lustgarten, who practically invented crime, has pointed out that it is not the law that changes public opinion, it is public opinion which very gradually modifies the law. If homosexuals prematurely bring about the passing of a law for which society is not ready, they will earn its hatred. Anyone who demands acceptance places himself in the same position as a girl who asks, "Do you really love me?" Every mature woman knows where that gets her. It is more than 40 years now since I presumed to think that I represented homosexuality. Since then I have come to realize that I represent nothing grander than my puny self. This does not mean that I have in any way connived at the hostility of the gay world. Especially in New York, I was sorry to find that I had made enemies. If this saddens me less now than formerly, it may be because I have recently acquired more friends among heterosexuals. On the stage in America I was often asked how the gay scene in New York compares with that of London. It was a question I couldn't answer because I'm never there. My journey has not taken me deeper and deeper into the jungle, but mercifully out into the common light of day. I will not be nudged into a quarrel with the human race. Now that we've finally met, I love it.